So one of the things that I planted in my garden that needed a lot of plants because I had a lot of empty beds that hadn't been taken care of were bulbs. You can't grow bulbs in Florida, and I just love spring flowers. So I've planted really thousands of bulbs, tubers, corms, and rhizomes that you plant in the fall and the flowers come up in the spring. I was going through, of course, in the winter, what does a gardener do but go through nursery catalogs? And I was looking at for things that would bloom in the summer and the fall that I could plant in the spring. And I was focusing on, again, bulbs, corms, tubers, and rhizomes. And why am I doing that? One, I really like perennials. I have a lot of bulbs that come up in the spring, and then I have a lot of annuals. But the perennials are the ones that are really the easiest to take care of. They come up every year. They don't need as much love as annuals do. And I was also looking for things that would flower in the summer and the fall so that I could spread my flowering season out across the seasons. And that's good. Well, one, it's pretty, right? To have more flowers for more of the year. And for another thing, it's a lot better for the pollinators like the bees and the other pollinators and the birds and other wildlife to have food and shelter and so forth for them throughout the year. It makes them want to stick around your house more. So in my yard, I have probably about an acre of garden, lawn and garden. And I've got some of it's irrigated, some of it's not, a lot of it's full sun. I've got shade. So I've got everything. I've got the full sun, and I don't have a river, but I've got the full sun and the moist soil, the full sun, dry soil, shade, dry soil, shade, moist soil. So when I'm looking at these kinds of plants that I could plant in my yard, I really could plant a lot of different kinds, but where do I put them and where are they going to do best? And I put down the catalog and I started doing some research, and I made a list of all the plants that would be good for me to plant in the spring here for flowers in the summer and the fall. And this presentation is a result of the research that I did. I'm first going to focus on the criteria that you want to look at when you're trying to select plants for your yard. And then I'm going to apply that criteria and show you plants, for example, that you can plant in full sun that need irrigation in the summer and so forth. So I'm going to start off. We're looking for the right plant for the right place. And I've got a list of criteria here. Probably the most important one is sun. In the spot that you want to put your plant, how much sun does it get? If it's when the catalog says full sun, that's 6 hours or more a day. If it says part sun, it's 4 to 6 hours of sun a day. Part shade is 2 to 4 hours of sun, and shade is less than 2 hours a day. One thing that you'll notice when you're shopping for plants is that most flowering plants, and especially the ones that are more ornamental, more showy, they prefer full sun. They prefer full sun and moist soil, really. And in general, most flowering shade plants prefer moist soil, not dry soil. There are exceptions to the rule, but it's not really a rule, but there are exceptions to this, but that's what you'll find in general. Another thing you want to think about when you're figuring out what to put where is you need to think about the hardiness zone in relation to sun. If a plant, like for example, is a zone 4 to 8 plant, and you live in Longview and you're zone 8B, that plant is at the lower end of its lower range of its zone, more southerly part of its zone, which means, yes, it likes full sun, but it really might like full sun in the morning and some shade in the afternoon to protect it from the afternoon heat. I have a still bee, and a still bee says that they're full sun. They are zone 4 to 8. And I had them on the west side of my house, and they struggled and they got burnt every year And I moved them to the east side where they get morning sun, and they love it there. Another criteria that many of us have to consider is whether or not something is deer and rabbit resistant. I have a lot of deer and I have a lot of rabbits. And when you're looking for deer and rabbit resistant plants, there are some characteristics of those plants that can tell you whether or not a deer or rabbit is going to like to eat it. If it has a rough, prickly, hairy, thorny texture, they're probably not going to like it. If it has a really strong taste like lavender or sage, they're probably not going to like it. And if it's toxic, they may very well not want to eat it. But I will tell you, deer and rabbits don't read the books, and they'll eat almost anything if they're hungry. And it's the babies that are the worst. I think that they have not figured out yet that if they eat X, that they're going to get sick when they go home. I'm so lucky. I have deer that have twins every year. So there's a lot of experimentation going on in my yard, and I hope some sick deer that need some chamomile tea when they get home, like Peter Rabbit did. I now understand Farmer McGregor. I did not when I was a child. One thing that I've noticed is that's funny to me is that perennials can get less appetizing to deer and rabbits as they become established. I planted some showy fleabane about 4 years back, and the first year they ate it to the ground right away. And I watered it anyway, hoping that they might survive because I saw a little bit of green still there. The second year they came up again. They ended up getting eaten again, not as early in the year, but they did get eaten. The third year, and ever since then, the deer and the rabbit have never touched them. And I think, does the texture get rougher? Do they get more, of a flavor, a stronger flavor? I don't know. But I've noticed that with a number of plants. Another thing to consider when you're trying to figure out what to put where is how much moisture it needs. And when we're talking about bulbs, corms, and tubers, you need to consider how much water they need in the summer, partly because it's dry here and partly because some of those plants, if it doesn't like to have water in the summer and you put it in a place that gets irrigation, gets water in the summer, it will very well rot and die. And the converse is true too. If it wants water in the summer, even if it's dormant, and you don't water it at all, it could also very well die. The catalogs will tell you, I'm going to say that these are very broad terms, moist and drought tolerant. Moist could mean that it likes to be wet all the time, like by a river, or moist could mean it could get by with a couple irrigations a week and it could wilt a tiny bit and still be okay. Drought resistant is even broader, I think, because drought resistant could mean you can get by with watering it once a week and it can wilt a little bit, or it could survive the whole summer without water. Now, those are really very two different things. And how do you figure that out? You have to do research if you're not certain about what the plant really wants. And looking at where it came from natively will help you with that. Another term that you'll see sometimes is vernally moist. That means it's wet in the spring and probably dry in the summer, which is exactly what we have here. Another thing about water, there are some plants that don't like to be watered in the winter. And if you plant something like that in your yard, well, you might want to put it in a container instead so that you can take it in and put it under the porch for the winter, or plant it under an eave, or make sure it gets really, really good drainage. So water is an important thing to consider, especially if you have areas of your yard that you irrigate and areas that you don't, because you don't really want to be doing a lot of hand watering. I will say that even if a plant is drought resistant, drought tolerant, that it's going to need to be watered the first 2 or 3 years of its life until it gets well established. So consider how many of those you order each year because you don't want to be spending 2 days a week hand watering like I have done before. Uh, Another criteria to consider is the hardiness zone range of the plant. You need to know your zone range, your zone, of course, and then consider whether or not you might be at the upper end or the lower end of that hardiness zone range. If you're on the upper end of the range, like let's say a zone 8 to 10 plant, like canna lily, then you are probably going to want to mulch it or dig it in the winter. So it's going to need special care in the winter. If you're north of any of its hardiness zones, yes, you could put it in a container or you can plant it and dig it up. But if you do either of those things, bring it in before frost hits, because if it's in a zone 9 to 11 plant and you're in zone 8, it's a tropical plant and is not frost tolerant. Another criteria is soil, of course. A lot of us have clay soil around here. Some have sand, but some plants are picky about where they are planted, and they'll do much better in one soil than another. If you have clay, or even if you have sand, one of the things you can do is add compost to it, or a garden soil that has a lot of roughage in it, and that will help. Most plants prefer well-drained soil. They don't like to sit in water. And if your plant wants well-drained soil and your soil does not drain well, let's say you have clay and you've tested it and it doesn't drain well, then you can plant the plant, but plant it on a slope or near a slope or hill up the soil before you plant it, because most of the plants, especially these plants, most of their roots are going to be in the top layer of the soil, like the first 6-8 inches. And so if you hill up the soil and then put the plant on top of it, that will help with drainage. Another thing it helps with is if you have clay in a lot of hardpan, like I do, you don't have to dig a big hole, which is really nice too. Saves a lot of time. I've done this with a lot of plants in my yard, and they've all done really well. And another thing that you can do is amend the soil with loamy matter. You can do that with any of the plants that we're talking about in this presentation. You should not do that with trees or shrubs, but any of these plants, amending the soil with loamy matter will help. Oopsie. Yep. Okay. And most plants prefer loamy soil as well. So amending the soil with compost or a garden soil that has a lot of roughage in it, and then top dressing the plant with compost will help them get off to a good start. I would caution you, though, not to add sand, thinking that will improve drainage, because sand and clay equals cement, and we don't want that in our yard. So that adding sand to clay is not recommended to improve drainage at all. And another criteria you might want to think about is whether or not something is native. Natives are generally easier to maintain because they're better adapted to your environmental conditions. And they do help restore the habitat for native bees and birds and other pollinators and wildlife. Note, though, that native to you means plants that are native to your region. So if you live west of the Cascades and you're looking at plants that are native to east of the Cascades, then they're not native to you. And they may not do well in your yard, and they may not be something that the wildlife in your area would prefer. Also, another example, just because something is native to the eastern US and it's not native to the western US doesn't mean that it would be something that you could consider native for your yard. In fact, it might be something that's invasive in your yard. And a last word of caution on natives It's your preference, but please don't plant invasive species. If you have any concerns about whether or not a plant is invasive, the state of Washington's Noxious Weed Board's website is really good. It will give you that information as to whether or not something is invasive, and it will give you alternatives if what you're looking at is an invasive plant. Invasives, the reason that they're called invasives, well, there are many reasons, but one of them is that they spread in an uncontrollable manner. And if you want to make less work for yourself, which most of us do, and I would recommend, then don't plant invasives. And a few other things to consider. Bloom time, you might want to coordinate when your plants bloom across the seasons and and coordinate the colors. When to plant. Most of the plants that we're going to talk about today, the garden catalogs say to plant them in spring after danger of frost has passed. And for us in zone 8B, that is about mid-April. If it says planting in spring after average danger of frost has passed, that's the same thing, mid-April again. And if it says plant in spring after all danger of frost has passed, that means you're probably talking about a tropical plant, and it needs to be planted in about the 3rd week of May because it can't tolerate any frost at all. You'll also see planted in late winter, planted in early spring, planted in mid-spring. The way that I interpret that is that I look at the season, like spring is March, April, May, right? Spring is March, April, May. So early spring would be March, mid-spring would be April, and late spring would be May. I always add a few weeks to that. Like if something says to plant it in late winter, I would plant it in early March. And it just seems to work better. The plants seem to be happier, basically. Another thing to consider when picking a nursery to buy from is when they're going to ship. A lot of the plant nurseries will ship to you when it's ready, when it's time to plant that plant in your area. And that to me works best because then they're taking care of the bulb or the tuber or whatever until
Johnny.
it's time to plant.
The package is there
Okay.
from Celestial Season. Yeah.
Okay.
Could everybody be
I'm watching my Zoom, but the
Oh,
internet dropped out partway through, so I missed a good.
Fine. You can finish that.
Um,
Go get it.
I think somebody doesn't realize that they're not on mute. Anyways, so some of them will ship whenever you place the order, and then that leaves it to you to take care of. I just find the nurseries have the facilities, the right environment for taking care of those plants. And I'm taking a little bit of a risk when I put it in my garage and then maybe forget about it. So anyways, that's another thing to consider. So then one other thing I wanted to mention, that's a lot of criteria. It's a lot of things to think about. One way to look at this, if you want to do the research, is if you look at where the plant is native from, it will give you a pretty good idea of what conditions it wants. Like if I'm picking a plant that's native to the Mediterranean, I know it's probably going to be fine with a wet winter, and it's going to tolerate at least some drought in the summer. If I'm looking at plants that are native to, let's say, northern China, northern Japan, northeast US, then I know that that's probably a pretty hardy plant that I don't have to do much with to prepare it for winter. And I also know that it can tolerate some water in the summer, so I can put it in an irrigated area. So that's another way to look at this issue of trying to figure out how to put the right plant in the right place. So now going to applying the criteria and coming up with some examples of plants to plant in certain parts of your yard. If you have a full sun place with little to no irrigation, here are some plants that will work. I know personally, bearded iris and crocosmia, they do not need any water in the summer. They will be just fine. They are just so resilient and pretty. Blazing star, I just planted that last year in an area that doesn't get water, and I did really well. I did water it every couple of weeks because I'm getting it established, but I think that's a good recommendation. And here are some more red hot poker, which comes in a lot more than just red hot, but this orange one is my favorite. Sea holly also comes in a lot of different shapes, but all kind of prickly and thistly and blue, very pretty. And naked ladies, or Amaryllis belladonna. Now this one's a little tricky because it does not like water in the winter. So if you plant it under eaves or in a container, it may do well. Now we get to plants that like full sun and water in the summer, which is most plants. So I have more examples of these. Canna lilies and calla lilies, both of these are, we are on the upper end of their zone. I think they're 8 to 10. So some people dig these in the winter. Some people mulch them. I have kind of a dry, hot yard compared to most because I think because I'm on a southern facing slope and I'm in Kalama, but I don't really have to baby my callas at all. But consider my environment before you decide to apply my recommendations. Bee balm or Monarda, this is a great plant. It does really well here. The bees love it and it spreads, but not in a crazy way. And there are some that are native to here as well. Siberian iris also does well. It doesn't need a lot of irrigation. My mouse is a little sensitive here. Here are some more plants that are full sun with irrigation. Dahlias, a lot of people dig those in the winter though. I don't, I mulch them. And last winter, it was a little cold and some of them died. So now it's really the hardiest ones that are still around. But a thought to consider, at the demo garden, we also have dahlias that we don't dig. Daylilies. Daylilies are not, most of these plants are deer resistant and rabbit resistant. Daylilies are not. Gladiolas, this is another plant. Sorry. Gladiolus is another plant that we are at the northern end of the range of, hardiness zone range, but hardy gladiolas is a different plant. I think their zones 4 to 8, so we're on the southern end of their range. Hardy glads are not quite as tall. They're not quite as showy. I actually think they're prettier, but that's an alternative if you don't want to have to baby your glads in the winter. And the last one I have on this page is Astrantia or Great Masterwort. Isn't that a cool flower? I love that. And here's some more full sun with irrigation plants. Oriental lilies, I think it says they're deer resistant, but mine aren't. Mine get eaten. Peruvian lilies. This is a plant that you see in grocery store bouquets quite a bit. So it's a good cut flower. Lilies of the Nile, agapanthus. We are in the northern range of that as well. But I have some in my yard and I don't mulch them in the winter and they do fine. And rain lilies, I don't even think we're in the hardiness zone range of rain lilies, but aren't they pretty? I think that's a plant worth putting in a container and babying. And some more that I couldn't find pictures that I could use, that is free pictures that didn't have copyright. Turtle heads, hardy glads, and trumpet lilies. And then we have some shade to part shade with irrigation. I put a stilby here because, like I said, we're on the lower end of their range and mine really do a lot better with afternoon shade and morning sun. Bug loss. Well, and one thing I would say about shade plants is that for the most part, you're not going to get really showy blooms, but you will get some really beautiful foliage with some blooms. And that applies to the hostas, which are not deer and rabbit resistant, and Solomon seal. Solomon seal is a good alternative, I think, to, it doesn't really look ferny, but it's got that arching draping look to it. So to me, it's kind of a good alternative to a fern when you're looking for something that is deer resistant. They all do need water in the summer. And a few more that, again, I couldn't find pictures of that I could show you. Goat's beard, which looks kind of like a really tall astilbe with white flowers. Bugbane and leopard plant are very dramatic, large plants. And toad lilies are small with little pretty flowers. This list is a list of plants that probably need some sort of care in the winter if you live around where we live in Zone 8B or thereabouts. A lot of these, some of these like rain lilies and tuberous begonias and freesia, we're not in the range of, in the hardiness zone range of, so you would need to put those in a container or dig them and bring them in and store them in your garage for the winter so that they don't get frozen at all. And I'd say anything that we're in the top end of the hardiness zone range with, you're safer to mulch it if you're not digging it. So that's about everything I wanted to show you. I did put a few slides in here that are basically the spreadsheet I put together when I was trying to figure out what to order. And I'm putting this in here not because I don't think it's readable. I'll show you. I don't think it's readable, but when this presentation gets posted on our website, you'll be able to go to the presentation, go to the end of it, and scroll through this and pause and look. But on these spreadsheets, I have the common name, the botanical name, when to plant it, whether or not it's native, what its hardiness zone range is, what kind of sun it likes, whether it's deer and rabbit resistant, whether it needs water in the summer. I have a big meadow that I don't water much in the summer, which is why that's important to me to be able to find plants that I can plant out there that I don't have to, that can stand the heat and the drought, basically. The kind of soil it likes, when it blooms, and I did put in the color of the bloom. And some notes. So, and then there's one more. I need to go back to this last page to show that to you as well. So that you'll be able to go back to it. So that is the end of my presentation and what I had to show you.